penny for your thoughts. No. A poor little dead rose for your thoughts, Alice Adams.
You came back.
I didn't go.
Why?
I've been waiting for you.
Then you heard...
Yes, I heard everything. And what's more,
But I...
Stop it. Let me finish. I heard a great deal at Mildred's this afternoon, too.
So they did talk about me.
Yes, they talk about you a lot. And I found out one thing. I love you, Alice.
Gee whiz.
I love you.
Hello, I'm film historian Tony Maeda.
And I'm Brad Shreve, who's just a guy who likes movies.
We discuss movies and television from Hollywood's golden age. We go behind the scenes and share our opinions, too.
And of course, being the average guy, my opinions are the ones that matter.
As does your self-delusion. Welcome to Going Hollywood.
Tony, you're the one that picked out this week's episode, and I'm looking forward to discussing this one. How are you feeling? Have you rebounded yet?
But we kept putting it off.
Well, we did keep hearing. In fact, I'm hoping I can remember it because I watched it a while back and I didn't get back around to it.
It's been the most delayed episode ever, I think, and even more than Chinatown. And it's not because I was daunted by it or because I was like, oh, wow, I really have to dig in for No, it's because of, I have COVID. And not only do I have COVID, I have rebound COVID. So it's even worse. So if my voice sounds particularly sultry, well, you can thank Paxlovid for that because I have that rebound. And let me tell you something, Brad. Rebound is real. It is a real thing. They say it's rare. It ain't rare. It is real, and she is a vengeful bitch. Let me tell you right now.
See, I lucked out. It was pure hell for 2 days, and once the Paxlovid kicked in, I just chilled on the couch for 8 days. I kept falling asleep. I was tired as hell, but the sickness was gone. So
no, for me, Rona is a vicious. You know what she is? She's Alex in Fatal Attraction. She will not be ignored. That's the way I'm looking at this because she's like, no, this pill's not going to, I'm coming back. This pill is not going to get rid of me. You're just not going to ignore me, Tony. You're going to feel this. So yeah, it's been a pretty rough road, but I feel excited to do this because I really wanted to do this film. Just because I love this film, but because we haven't done a black and white film. We've been doing a lot of 70s and 80s, which is great, and 60s, which is great. I mean, nothing wrong with that, but thinking about this as classic Hollywood, you can't get much more classic than our film today, which is from 1935, and it's the delightful, at least to me it's delightful, Alice Adams, starring Katharine Hepburn and Fred MacMurray. How's that?
You stumped me on this one. I had another one I had never heard of, and I thought I knew Hepburn backwards and forwards.
That surprises me. You never, because when I suggested it to you, you're like, yeah. And I just figured, oh, he must know it. Well,
see, unlike you, I make a recommendation. You're like, think of something else, and whatever you suggest, I'm like, yeah, let's go for it.
That's not true.
So
that's not true.
That is true,
listener. That is not true.
No, if he doesn't want to watch it, I changed to something else.
There's a couple coming up where I was like, should we do this? But I did them.
Yes, you did.
Well, no. Here's the thing that I find wonderful about this film is that it really is the peak of Hepburn's early career. We touched a bit on Hepburn in her early career when we did Bringing Up Baby, and about how in 32, she hit the scene in the Bill of Divorcement and just blew everybody away. She was just something new and exotic, and they called her the American Garbo, and no one had ever seen the likes of her before. And then she hit a peak of an Academy Award 1 year later with Morning Glory, and then fell into disfavor very quickly. Very quickly. So it's kind of interesting. To me, and Bringing Up Baby aside, I think you have to take Bringing Up Baby out of the equation because it's different. It's a farce. I don't put Bringing Up Baby in this. This is her best early career performance. I just think she's delightful and wonderful in Alice Adams.
Well, I'm going to break one of our rules because normally I save my opinions till later. Mm-hmm. It's not really a rule. We just generally wait for me to save my opinions.
Yeah, so you can.
I'm going to tell you there's
shock value.
Three times that Katharine Hepburn has made me cry. One of them was on the same day. The morning I heard that she died,
Yeah.
I cried. And then I had an appointment. And I'm walking down Hollywood Boulevard. It's the same day. And I'm like, oh, I wonder what all that is up there. I got up there, and it was her star, and there were flowers and people crying, and I cried again.
Mm-hmm.
The third time I cried for Katharine Hepburn was when I watched this god-awful movie.
Oh, no.
Tony, no.
Oh, no.
I'm sorry. This is the absolute most torture you have put me through.
Are you serious?
I can't wait to talk about this
Oh,
one.
no.
And trust me, I was excited for it.
I love this movie.
Oh, I was in pain.
This is going to be interesting.
Yes, it will be. It will be very interesting.
This is going to be very interesting because, well, maybe I shouldn't have you give a synopsis of it then, since you
No, I
disliked
can
it
give
so
a synopsis.
much.
The synopsis is pretty easy.
Yeah.
The synopsis is it's a comedy, drama, romance, and it's directed by George Stevens.
Mhm.
And it's adapted from the novel the same name by Booth Tarkington. This is the second movie that was made after this. Am I correct? Yeah,
Right.
It was a silent film.
Right, yeah. In 21, yeah.
Starred,
I'm sorry, the novel was 21. There was a film version made in 23, a silent
which is a pretty quick
version.
turnaround for a movie back then, I would think.
Yeah.
So it stars Katharine Hepburn, who I adore. Fred MacMurray, who I usually am not real fond of, but I've seen him in stuff I liked. Fred Stone, who played Katharine Hepburn's father, and he was my favorite in this film.
Yeah.
And then Anne Shoemaker, her vile mother. And in this movie, Katharine Hepburn plays Alice Adams, the title character. And she comes from what is kind of, they keep acting like they're a lower class family, but they're actually lower middle class family.
Right.
And really their house is pretty nice. She wants to climb the social ladder, and that's her ambition. So she mingles amongst the elite, and they tolerate her, but they don't respect her. And that's pretty obvious. So it's kind of painful to watch those scenes. Now, in this lower middle class Adams family, the father and son are happy to work in a drug company, though the father is not working at this time because he is ill. And we're never really told what it is, if it's an illness or an injury of some kind. But the mother and daughter, Alice, try every possible social climbing strategy they can, despite the snubs and embarrassment that Alice gets.
Right.
And when Alice finally meets the man of her dreams, Arthur, who is played by Fred MacMurray, her mother nags the father into a risky business venture and plans to impress Alice's beau with an upscale family dinner, which is the funniest moment in this movie, though I think it falls flat. The dinner is excruciatingly painful for the family, which is part of the humor. And will it drive Arthur away?
You know, in your synopsis, you missed, and you talked about you missed one key element in this.
What was that?
That is the wonderful performance by Hattie McDaniel.
Well, I figured we would get to that when we got to the dinner scene, because she was great.
Yeah, many people called her the standout of this film. But yeah, we'll get to Hattie McDaniel because we definitely want to talk about Hattie McDaniel in this. She just steals the movie. Her name's Melina, and she steals the movie as the hired maid, I guess is the best word for it, for the day of the family.
With hardly any lines.
To impress. Well, that's a big thing about the movie, and that's a big thing about George Stevens. So before you decimate this movie for people, I want to talk about why I love it and a little bit of background about it. So yes, it's based on a 1921 novel by Booth Tarkington, who also wrote Magnificent Ambersons, if anybody knows that. He was very much his milieu, if that's the right word, is Midwestern America. So he was a very American writer, and his stories take place in that, turn of the century, early 20th century in middle America. And that's where Alice Adams takes place. And in that time, it was very socially, the social classes were very restricted. It was very difficult for people to jump the social classes. And that's exactly what Alice wants to do. She dreams of being in upper class, to be high society. She's definitely on the wrong side of the tracks, even though I love that house. I would take that house in a minute. That's a gorgeous, it wasn't gorgeous, but it's
great.
solid. It looks like a really great Frank Lloyd Wright, a really great arts and crafts house. I loved it. I love the back stairway too. I have a thing about back stairs.
But you know what? The living room, it was a craftsman's house, which I love craftsman style. Mm-hmm. But what really was grabbing me the whole time I'm watching the living room, it is the bunker house is identical. The door on the front to the right with the window. Yeah. They come in the door. There's the closet and then the stairs. It's almost identical to the bunker house.
I think it's a great movie set. I really do.
Yeah. It was a very basic set. It's easy to work with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in the novel, it's basically the same premise. The ending is different, though, and I want to talk about that when we get to the ending of the film. So this movie was a silent originally. It was remade. Hepburn was at a point in her career. She had won the Academy Award for Morning Glory. She was offered a role in a play on Broadway called The Lake. But before she went to New York to do The Lake, she made one last film, which really deserves your tears, Brad, and it's called Spitfire, in which she plays an Appalachian mountain girl. Now, if you will, can you think of anybody more Hartford, Connecticut than Katharine Hepburn? That Bryn Mawr.
Is it bad or good bad?
Oh my God, it's atrocious. It's atrocious. That Bryn Mawr accent wrapped up and around the musings of a hillbilly girl. Katharine Hepburn, she looks great, running around the backwoods and bare feet. I mean, it's ludicrous. And Katharine Hepburn actually kept a photo of herself from Spitfire on her dressing room wall, on her mirror. She said to keep herself humble, so she wouldn't forget what happened. So anyway, but Spitfire hadn't been released yet. But The Lake, she had a bad experience with The Lake. It was one of the formative experiences of her career. It was a disaster. It's the play that the famous wit Dorothy Parker said she ran the gamut of emotions from A to B. So it was devastating for her. And this is when her career started to turn. So she figured she better get back to Hollywood quickly and make a hit movie. So she loved Alice Adams. She was very drawn to Alice Adams. And she thought that it would be perfect for her, even though she couldn't really identify with the character of Alice Adams. Alice Adams, as we said, is from the wrong side of the tracks. Hepburn wasn't from anywhere but the wrong side of the tracks. Hepburn was, she wasn't a socialite, but she was definitely upper class. But she identified with this character because this character was an outsider. So even though she did not identify with her as a member of the lower class, she did identify with the outsider aspects of Alice. And she wanted George Cukor to direct it. He was not available. He suggested William Wyler. And Pandro Berman, who was the head of RKO at the time, suggested George Stevens. Now, Hepburn didn't know Stevens. She wanted to lean more towards Wyler. Berman wanted Stevens because Stevens is a California native. Stevens was American. And this is an American story. Now, Wyler was a wonderful director. I love William Wyler. But he might not have had the same perspective that an actual American director would have on this most American of stories. So the story goes is that Berman said Stevens, Hepburn said Wyler, and they went back and forth, and they were in his office, and Berman said, let's flip a coin. And Hepburn's like, all right, flip the coin. Heads, it's Wyler, tails, it's Stevens. So they flipped the coin, and it came up Wyler. And they stood there in silence for a few seconds. And Pandro Berman looked at Hepburn, and he said, let's flip it again. And Hepburn said, okay. And she flipped it, and it came up Stevens. So it was Stevens. So there was clearly something inside her, which she was like, Stevens is right for this. And he was. This was his first big film. He had begun in silence. He directed Laurel and Hardy comedies. He began as an assistant cameraman, actually. He's one of the great directors of the Golden Era. He did Giant. He did A Place in the Sun. He did The More the Merrier, one of my favorite films. So I'm excited to talk about George Stevens. But anyway, so we had George Stevens. We had Katharine Hepburn making not a comeback, but pretty damn close to a comeback in this film. And we had Fred MacMurray in his very first major role as a leading man.
And quite handsome.
He was a looker in the time. I mean, there was a reason why he became a movie star. There really was.
I was like, wow, I never pictured him being that strapping.
Yeah, I go back and forth about Fred MacMurray. I do like him in this. He really has very little to do.
He's a cardboard cutout. He
is a cardboard cutout.
It's not his fault. It's a nothing character other than for her to have a love interest.
Yes, exactly. So, but I think he's well suited for her. And the thing I want to say about Alice Adams before we go in too much into it is that this was actually, Alice Adams was a personal favorite of Katharine Hepburn's out of all of her films. She really did have a very soft place in her heart for Alice Adams. And she was nominated for Best Actress. And this was the year that Bette Davis won for Dangerous. Now, everybody pretty much had the consensus that Dangerous was a consolation prize for Bette Davis not even getting nominated for Of Human Bondage the year before. They opened up to write-ins. They were so upset about Bette Davis not getting nominated for Of Human Bondage. So this was pretty much a consolation prize. And even Bette Davis, and this is rare, even Bette Davis thought that Katharine Hepburn should have won for Alice Adams. Because in my opinion, it's a wonderful, touching, sweet, cusp of annoying, and obviously you went over that cusp, but important to the character, endearing performance. And P.S., she looks absolutely beautiful in it.
She does. And I don't recall ever seeing her this young. I'm sure I have before, but I was really like, wow, she looks incredible. She did. She looked fabulous. And I will say there's another difference between her. You know, Alice was trying to climb up the social ladder and Hepburn came for money. The other thing is, you know, I'm sure on the inside, you know, you'll know, everybody I know in the entertainment industry on the inside is a bundle of insecurities, but she always carried herself very secure. I mean, Alice was super insecure and unsure of herself.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, there's a reason why her nickname was Catherine of Arrogance. I mean, that's what they called her. I mean, because but you know, that was a cover. That was a complete cover for her massive insecurities. I mean, she admitted it so much later in her life, you know, when she was weaving the myth of Katharine Hepburn about how she was terrified. So she put on this front, perhaps too well, and really alienated people, which kind of led to her entire, you know, downfall in the mid to late 30s. And that's why this film is really her peak. Because there was still just enough goodwill from this film. This film was a hit, by the way. It didn't make money. So this was really her last solo hit at RKO. And I think that, for me personally, I love it. I love the film.
You know, I'm thinking about stand-up comedians. I'm sure if I thought hard enough, I could come up with one. But every stand-up comedian that is coming to mind that I know is massive amounts of insecurity, which most of us are to some degree. But they seem to be more... What is it about the entertainment industry? Anyway, that's a whole different subject.
Well,
we'll get to that someday.
How long do we have for this podcast? I mean, come on.
We'll need to find a psychology podcast, and you can talk about that one.
Well, the amazing thing about Hepburn is, and Pandora Berman said this, you know, when she came to Hollywood, she acted like she was already a star. You know, she made a splash on Broadway, and that's when she got the attention of people in Hollywood. But she acted like she was a huge star, and she wasn't. She got to Hollywood. She demanded, first of all, no long-term contract, which is unheard of, and she demanded $1,500 a week in 1932. Now, to put this into perspective, in 1932, James Cagney, who was a star, who had done The Public Enemy and was huge, was only making $12.50.
Wow.
So you have this woman who's coming and saying, I'll do this film for you, bill of divorcement. I'll do it, but I'm not going to sign a contract, and it's going to be $1,500 a week for this amount of weeks, and then it's going to go up, and then it's going to go up. And the amazing thing is that confidence carried her through until she basically fulfilled her death. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy that she become a star.
And you know, you probably know this more than I do. There's a reason why there are some really, really outstanding waiters. There's a reason why there are some really, really outstanding actors that are bussing tables. And we have people on the big screen that ain't doing it very well.
There's a reason they're really, really amazing waiters. I love that. We're going to keep that in because that's very funny. That's a very funny, but true
Well, they
slip.
become amazing waiters because they do it so much.
Exactly, because they are. So a little bit about this movie before Brad tears it to shreds. Some of the things I love about it. Yes, you had mentioned earlier that there's some very slow, silent. Compare this movie with Bringing Up Baby. Now it's not really fair because we're comparing two different styles, comparing farce and romantic comedy. Mm-hmm. This movie, Bringing Up Baby, is breakneck. It never stops. This movie has long stretches of silence, but they're in funny scenes, and it comes directly from George Stevens. As I said, George Stevens came from silent film. He was not afraid to have long sequences without dialogue. And to me, that's what makes this movie so interesting, is particularly the scene. There are two scenes. The scene at the dance. Alice goes to a dance, and she's kind of in this old dress that is totally out of style last year, and the bitches who were there mention it as she's walking by. By the way, Katharine Hepburn is so much more beautiful than any one of those bitches at that dance. I'm stunned.
I agree.
That they have the nerve to give her shade. I think she's terrible. Oh, and did you happen to notice the woman who played Mildred? The girl who's giving the party's name is Mildred. Did you happen to notice who her mother was by any chance? Did that strike you?
No.
Her mother was none other than Hedda Hopper. So when you're watching Alice Adams...
Oh, I did know.
Did she look familiar to you?
No, I knew Hedda Hopper was in the movie, but I never connected. The problem is that this movie was so old. Like Hepburn, I don't know if I would have noticed her. But
well, yeah.
People were so much younger in this film than what I was used to. I don't know if I would have recognized MacMurray if I just saw a picture of him.
Hedda Hopper played Mrs. Palmer. And this was pretty much Hedda Hopper's final acting role in film. After this was the same year, 1935 was the same year she started working as a stringer for Gossip. And then she became Hedda Hopper. And then she was in films as Hedda Hopper. But this is really her last acting role. And she very much has that same kind of haughty superciliousness in this film. It's perfect for her. So the scene at the dance, when Alice is invited to this dance and she has to bring her brother because she doesn't have a date. She's trying very hard to seem like the social butterfly, to seem like the things that she wants to be. She's really trying to do this self-manifestation that she's a society girl. And the silences are so important here because Alice's face, as she's ignored by boys, as she is ignored by girls, or she hears comments, she still tries to maintain that optimistic, the smile which slowly fades with each little insult. And then when Fred MacMurray comes over to her and asks her to dance, and Fred MacMurray is the catch at the dance, the catch of the catch, he's supposedly Mildred's fiance, but he's showing an awful lot of attention to Alice Adams.
Yeah, that was.
But her face, how she lights up when he shows her that attention. You just want to tell her to be quiet. Stop talking. Stop talking. That's the thing about Alice Adams. You want to say to Katharine Hepburn, stop talking. You're ruining it. But that's the character. You know what I mean? That's who she is. She's so insecure. And she just goes off on these flights of fancy, which just create her downfall, basically. And she sends Fred MacMurray to go find her brother, who's playing craps in the back with the servants. And of course, she's humiliated. And she goes home, and there's a very interesting scene. And I want to get your opinion on this scene. So she comes home, and she's still trying to play light and trying to play like it was a wonderful evening. She goes home, she says goodnight to her parents, and she goes in her bedroom, and she goes up to the window where it's been raining, and the window's slightly open, and she breaks out in tears. And it's a beautiful scene. And as she's crying, the rain is hitting the window and kind of enhancing her tears, which is a beautiful scene. And it wasn't originally written that way. It was originally written that she throws herself on the bed in tears. And George Stevens said, why don't we have you go to the window while the water is falling? It will be really effective. As I said, it will enhance your tears and make the scene even more moving. And Hepburn loved this idea. She's like, let's do it. But what happened was they went to film it, and it's the actor's nightmare. She went up to cry, and she couldn't cry. So rather than say, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble, she became Katharine Hepburn, the star, and said, George, it's a stupid scene. It won't work. I can't do it like this. I can't do it. We're going to do it the way. So they had a battle. And according to Hepburn, some explicatives were thrown. And she was so shaken by the fact that George Stevens really lit into her that unlocked her tears. And she was able to cry. She also blamed it on the cold water from the rain. She didn't say she had a dry moment. She said that it was the cold water from the rain. I couldn't cry because of the cold water was hitting me in the face. That unlocked her tears, and she was able to do it. And it's a beautiful scene, and I think it points out what a great director George Stevens was, even at this point in his career. A great director knows how to work with an actor to let that happen, whether it be put your arms around her, like Sidney Pollack did with Barbra Streisand when she couldn't cry, and that unlocked the tears. In this instance, it was yelling back at Katharine Hepburn, unlocking her tears. And by the way, P.S., and earning Katharine Hepburn's respect for the rest of her life because he stood up to her. What do you think of that scene?
What I think of the scene, think of the dance scene or the bedroom scene, the crying scene?
Either one, both.
Let's start with the crying scene. Visually throughout this movie, it looked great. Now, I will tell you my whole thought process, because now that you're talking about this, I'm like, oh, I can see it. I think she should have been on bed because I'm sitting there looking at this and seeing how sad her father is because he can hear her cry. And all I'm thinking is, how can he hear her cry when she has the window open and it's pouring rain? So I didn't get the whole artistic part. I'm getting this doesn't make sense.
How does he hear that? How does he hear that?
And, I'm going to try and be kind here because I didn't watch this with any anticipation of not liking it. I really was, because I loved the look of it. The story is very cute and I love Hepburn, and I was surprised that I found MacMurray handsome, but it just really rubbed me wrong. So let's go back to the dance scene.
Mm-hmm.
That took from the time we met her and her father and her horribly nagging mother, to the end of that dance scene was the first 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a lot of silence. And it went on too long because it wasn't just the silence. It was her little nervous smiles, the nervous titters, and her being uncomfortable where to sit and how to stand, and her brother leaving her when she wanted him to dance. And then
that didn't make you feel for her and her anxiety that she was having?
Not when it went on so long. I'm like, I get the point. This is real. Now she's just on my nerves. and she brought that awkward boy over to dance with her. And
yes.
She was really mean to him. I mean, he just took it.
I thought she was very gracious to him.
At first.
I thought she was so glad that somebody asked her to dance.
She was, but then she's like, no, let's just sit here. And then it got kind of mean. She didn't mean to, but it was kind of mean. But it just was. I'm just like, you know what? I was uncomfortable. I thought maybe she did well. It went the people looking at her and her trying to smile when you could tell she just wanted to crawl under the couch, and she's trying to fit in when she clearly did not. It was excruciating to watch. And went on way too long. It was painful.
So that didn't, by the way,
it wasn't cute. It was painful.
So the actor who you're talking about, his name is Grady Sutton. He played Frank Dowling. He did a lot of parts like that. These kind of like nebbish, wimpy, obviously he's whipped by the females in his life. But that didn't inspire empathy in you. You didn't think, oh, this poor guy, because it went on so long. That didn't make you feel for her even more.
No, I wanted to get the hell out of there.
Okay.
It just it wasn't fun to watch. I kept, if it's supposed to.
It's heartbreaking.
This movie is supposed to be a romance and a drama and a comedy. I really saw more of a drama. There was comedy. I saw very little romance. So we'll get to that later. But no, it was uncomfortable. I didn't find it cute or interesting. I just found it irritating. And I'm like, I'll get to more later why I found it irritating. But Hepburn just really disappointed me in this film.
Wow. See, I find her, to me, she won the Oscar for Morning Glory a couple years before this. And the character in Morning Glory, to me, is the way you're describing Alice Adams. I find her incredibly annoying in Morning Glory. They're very similar characters, by the way, but Eva Lovelace, to me, in Morning Glory, is so annoying and goes on these flights which are just ridiculous flights of fancy. To me, Alice Adams, there's so much more pathos in this performance. This is a girl who loves her family, despite the fact that she's in this position where she's trying to reach up. She's not dismissing her family. She loves her family. She loves her father. She loves her mother. She loves her brother. She just wants a better life, but she doesn't do it at the expense of them. She doesn't sacrifice her relationship with her parents. She still loves her parents. And at the end, if Fred MacMurray wants to go his own way because they're not good enough for him, that's fine with her. She's with her family, the way she comes to her father's defense, her brother's defense. So to me, that makes me love her. To me, it makes me say, yes, you poor thing. It gives me I have such sympathy for what this character is going through, her anxieties about what she wants in life and how she just can't seem to get it, but not at the expense of her family. And I admire that.
Well, I'll tell you, the whole dance scene, first of all, that is an amazing house. This is a small town.
Yeah.
That's quite an amazing mansion in a small town, and quite the big part. I was like, wow, that little town certainly has a lot of society people mingling around. Maybe they came from outside the area. But anyway, I think the problem was it was very real. And movies shouldn't be real. It's just like, if movies were like real life, half the movie would be idle chit chat about bullshit, and that's where I think it failed. I got the point. Why continue to put us through this agony?
I think so. You'll really get the point. So you'll really feel for. Well, can you imagine?
Yeah, definitely got it.
Okay, we didn't do a spoiler alert. So spoiler alert. There, we just did it. Can you imagine had the movie ended the way the book ends? Okay, so
I agree with her that it should have ended that way.
well, so did George Stevens. The original ending of the book. So listeners, so we've gone through. She does have a romance with Arthur, with Fred MacMurray's character. He comes to dinner. We'll talk about the dinner scene because it really is the linchpin of the whole movie. The dinner is a disaster of epic proportions, and in the book, after the dinner, she says, you're released. You don't. I understand. You may go, and there's just a heartbreak. But she's still smiling. There's such heartbreak in her voice. And she thinks he leaves in the movie. And then there's this whole scene with her father and Mr. Lamb, his employer, and this whole misunderstanding, which is taken care of. Which,
whoa.
Yeah.
She doesn't say you may go. She pushes his ass out the door.
Well, you know what I'm saying.
She makes it so he has no choice.
She gets very magnanimous because she's humiliated. But she does, she does release him from his obligation. Your obligation is over after tonight. She says something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing. And she thinks he leaves. And then this whole situation happens with her father and his former employer, and she fixes it. And then she goes back on the porch again, and she thinks he's gone, but he's not. Because he said to her earlier in the movie, the only one who could drive me, because she warned him earlier about the girls and people saying things about her in town. And he said to her, the only person who could drive me away is you. And she turns around to find him still there. And he says to her again, the only person who could drive me away is you. So in the end of the film, they're together. In the book, he's not on the porch. He's gone. And she gets a job. She goes back to business school. She goes to business school and she gets a job and she supports her family and she runs into him later. It's a very way we were ending in the book. She runs into him months later. And it's obvious that they're never going to reconcile. It's over. That was the original ending in the script. But Pando Berman, the head of RKO, said, no, we need a happy ending. If you want a box office hit, we need a happy ending. And Hepburn didn't like this, and Stevens didn't like it, but they shot it anyway because he was Pando Berman. He was the chief. He was the head of production. They had to do that. And Hepburn said that she still wasn't crazy about the ending, but she understood it. And she really believes the reason the movie was a hit was because of the happier ending.
I think you missed something, though. To me, that movie with the alternate ending, the original ending today would have been the happy ending.
I was going to say that, yes.
Because she no longer depended on everyone else. She didn't have to climb up the social ladder to be who she wanted to be. She went to business school to strike out on her. She was going to make it on her own. She didn't need him. She didn't need other girls to love her. She was being who she was going to be.
Right. Said as a true 2024 modern man. Yes, Brad. But in 1935...
I get why it didn't work back then. I totally get that. But I think it would have been a better movie.
That was totally... I actually made a note of that too. Same thing you just said. If this movie were made today, it would have that ending where she goes back to business school and actually works it, because we would have to have it. That's the ending we would have to have today. This romantic ending at the end, you're like, no, this is stupid. But in 1935, depression, this is what audiences wanted, and clearly they were correct. Pando Berman was correct. George Cukor also advised her, Berman is correct. You need a happy ending for this if you want a hit. And that's what happened.
Well, from a business standpoint, I think it was the right decision. I can't argue that. No, I agree, especially given that time era.
So let's talk about Hattie McDaniel.
Tony, you and I get excited when we get messages and emails and texts from listeners that tell us how much they enjoy the show.
We do.
But I think we should push it a little bit and ask them to go a little bit further.
Ooh, a challenge.
If you enjoy this show, let others know. 5 stars are great, whatever you want to give, except 1 star. If you have 1 star, say, that show's not for me and move on. We accept that.
Yeah, you don't give us 1 star. Just say, no, not for me. Just skip it. Or tell your friends. That's the best way too, right? Tell your friends, hey, I have this great fun podcast with these 2 kooky guys who talk about movies and TV. We run the gamut. We have everything.
Yeah, we're all over the place.
We're all over the place is a better way to put it.
But in a good way. So do it right now before you forget.
So let's talk about Hattie McDaniel. So as I said before, the dinner scene, which is kind of the linchpin of the entire film, it's the set piece of the entire movie. I find it incredibly funny, incredibly heartbreaking, And one of the reasons it's so funny is Hattie McDaniel. And Hattie McDaniel plays Melina, who's a maid that Mrs. Adams has hired just for the day, just for this dinner, so that Fred MacMurray's character will think that their family is of a higher society than they are. It's very problematic today to watch, even though I don't think there's anything necessarily objectionable about Hattie McDaniel playing this part, but I can see where people have issues with it, because she's just
I don't think I don't think there was nothing overt. Certainly, I think it was just to me it was a sign of the times.
Yes,
which that's why it's uncomfortable today to watch. But yeah, I don't think she was put in a space to be a.
But the humor in that scene comes from Hattie McDaniel. She's so funny.
Yes.
In it, she played. The character of Melina. First of all, it's incredibly hot. It's the hottest day of the year, and they're having sweetbreads, which are organs. If anybody thinks sweetbreads are something else, they're an animal's organs. They're having Brussels sprouts. They're having things which are so heavy because you didn't plan it well. And Hattie McDaniel goes, "Don't you think you should be serving something else on this?" I mean, Hattie McDaniel is basically the character she plays in Gone with the Wind, but she's not. You know what I mean? It's the same kind of attitudes, the same kind of even more so, even eye rolling. And Hattie McDaniel serving this meal to this family as the ice cream is now soup, and the Brussels sprouts keep getting away from her and rolling on the table. And her hat that she has, that floppy hat, the maid's hat, it's so hot it keeps wilting, and she keeps pushing it back in her face. I think it's a brilliant comic scene.
I'll tell you who she reminded me of. Benson when he was on Soap.
Oh, sure,
before
yes.
he got his own series.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
He was the smart one. He knew what was going on. The rest of them were nuts. And she's going through the motions and rolling her eyes and sharing her opinion at times.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's a great character. And nobody did it better than Hattie McDaniel. Hello, she won an Oscar for it, for playing Mammy in Gone with the Wind. So, nobody played this type of role better than Hattie McDaniel. She's brilliant at it. She had, she got a big break. She was a singer, and she often supported herself. This is what's really sad is she often, when she was doing these roles, she would support herself as a maid in real life before she really hit. In 1933, she was in I'm No Angel with Mae West, and that was her first really big break. And then, of course, this movie in 35, and then Gone with the Wind, and then hopefully she never had to work as a maid in real life again. That was Hollywood at the time. But I think she's wonderful in this film, and she's another one who delivers, as we said, the silences, her looks, the way she looks at the Addams family. Funny, the Addams family. The way she looks at this family, like, are you crazy for eating this food on this hot day? It's a scene-stealing performance. She gives that scene its humor. And Hepburn gives it its drama, its pathos. It's a heartbreaking scene because the dinner is falling apart, and this means everything to Alice. Everything.
Yeah, and Hattie speaks volumes through her facial expressions.
She's wonderful.
She really, it was great.
It's Stevens relying on his silent film techniques to tell a story. He didn't need words. They had faces then. And these faces in this, and if you watch Hepburn in this scene, when things are getting more and more out of control and she's getting more and more desperate and her anxiety is building, the woman does not blink. In every single, you're not going to go back and watch it again, obviously. But listener, if you haven't watched it, watch Katharine Hepburn in this scene and watch her anxiety level rise. She's the only one who's not sweating. I don't know how. Everybody's sweating. Fred MacMurray's sweating. Everybody in this house is sweating except Katharine Hepburn. But she does not blink. It's just one rapid bit of dialogue after the other, and she just digs herself in deeper and deeper and deeper. And this is when you want to say, please, please stop talking. Please. But she can't help herself. That's who she is. And in this film, at least, it's okay because he's there in the end, but not in the book, not in the original script.
I thought this was a funny scene, but it also made me very, very uncomfortable, and I'll get into that. But before we get into my tearing this across the coals, and I won't entirely, should I tell how the movie did?
Yes, please do.
I'll give the stats on this movie.
Give the stats of the movie.
I didn't realize how prolific George Stevens was. The man directed 60 films.
Yes.
And that included The Greatest Story Ever Told, Giant, The More the Merrier, Gunga Din,
Place in the Sun, which I would love to talk about sometime.
This movie was nominated for an Oscar for Best Picture and Best Actress. And as you said, she did lose out to Bette Davis. And I was equally surprised to learn that Bette said that she should have won. That's not the Bette Davis I ever knew.
Yeah, right, exactly.
The film that won was Mutiny on the Bounty, which was a good film. I don't remember it well enough, so I can't say if it deserved it or not because I don't remember it. But it was a good film. The budget of this film was $342,000, which sounds like a lot to me back then. It grossed $770,000 worldwide, which adjusted for inflation is $17 million today. So not bad.
No.
Other top films that year were, as I said, Mutiny on the Bounty. There was China Seas, which I'm not really familiar with.
Clark Gable, Jean Harlow, Hattie McDaniel. She's in it, ironically.
Top Hat, which was nominated. David Copperfield, which was nominated. And Les Mis, which was nominated as well. Obviously, the rest of the world does not agree with me. They agree with Tony because Rotten Tomatoes, the critic score is 89% and the audience score is 71%. So clearly, I am missing something because this movie made me so uncomfortable. And the reason is the scenes that were supposed to be uncomfortable were so uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yes.
She, first of all, my complaint, the reason why I said I guess this is supposed to be a romance. You brought this up when it came to A Star is Born, not the Judy Garland version, the one before that.
The Janet Gaynor, Fred MacMurray version, yeah.
You said until Judy Garland came up, there was really you never really saw why the male lead fell for her. What did he see in
her talent? Her talent. Yeah.
This, I was like, what does he see in her as there's a love interest? Because at the party, she wasn't like shy and tittering in a good way. She was like skin crawling. Like I would never. She was pretty.
You don't think he sees the real, the inner Alice Adams? You don't think he sees this unique creature, this Hepburn?
I didn't.
You don't think he sees Hepburn in Alice Adams?
Why would he? I didn't.
Really?
No. The whole movie, the whole way through, right up to the very end, I'm like, why does he care about this woman? There's no chemistry between these two.
See, I think
it's almost like, I almost felt like it was a Pretty Woman kind of thing in the sense that he wanted to save her, but there wasn't the connection.
I think it's the age-old thing about seeing the diamond in the rough, but no, being this guy who's lived his entire life around these society women, and he's so bored by them, and he's so over them, and then he sees this woman who's so different and so unique, and he's intrigued. Plus, she's also, I'm sorry, she's so beautiful in this film. She's stunningly beautiful in this film.
She is beautiful, but you hit the nail on the head for me. I think it is supposed to be he sees the diamond in the rough, but all I saw was rough. I never saw the diamond. No, I never did. First of all, let's talk about the family. I like the father. He was a kind man. I thought it was funny. The only unkind moment he had was when Hattie McDaniel's off stage. You heard her. They said she fell down the stairs.
She fell down the cellar steps.
And he didn't ask how was she. What did he asked? Like,
what was it?
Yeah, it was. I don't know. It was some self-serving question.
Fred Stone, yes. Very funny guy.
But other than that, he was a very kindly man. I also liked his boss, who was ready to fire him. But in the end, Did you recognize that was Uncle Henry? That was Charlie Grapeland? Yes, I did.
You recognize
I did recognize that. I liked that, he had a warm heart in the end. And those were the only two likable characters I found. Fred MacMurray, I didn't dislike. They just didn't give him enough to do to like or dislike him. The mother was the horrible, horrible nag. Horrible woman. The father is in bed most of this film for whatever reason. We don't know what he has. And she is nagging him, talking about how poor they are. As Tony and I said, this is a nice house during the Depression. But she is on his ass constantly about he needs to do better, that they're living too poor.
Yeah.
And she never has a nice thing to say. So she is a horrible person.
Mrs. Adams really is kind of the villain of this piece. And you can see why Alice is the way she is, because she got most of it from her mother.
Well, yeah.
But I think Alice has a saving grace. I think Alice she's not as bad as her mother, clearly. I think that Hepburn imbues her with such love and such, you have such empathy for this character. I feel for this girl who just wants what everybody else has. All these girls, she's the outsider. That's why Hepburn identified with this. She just wants to have what everybody else has, and she doesn't understand why she can't, because look at her. I'm beautiful. I'm smart. I have interesting voice. I can carry a conversation, God knows. Fred MacMurray is pretty uninteresting, but I think that's more along the lines of Fred MacMurray.
Well,
You
yeah.
know, I mean,
I've never been a huge fan of his. So
you want to hear something really crazy about Fred MacMurray? I have a couple. I have one very interesting, funny, I think, Fred MacMurray story I want to tell. But do you know Fred MacMurray in 1943 and 1944 was the highest paid actor in Hollywood? Now, think about that for a minute.
no.
In 43 and 44, he was the highest paid actor in Hollywood. It could have something to do with the fact that he didn't serve during World War II. So while Jimmy Stewart and Clark Gable and his compatriots were all fighting, he didn't serve. Now, I'm not saying anything about his patriotism. That's what I'm saying. I'm just saying he was in Hollywood working, so it could be why he was the highest paid actor in 43 and 44.
Well, John Wayne didn't work either, did he? I mean, he didn't serve, did he?
He didn't serve either. But John Wayne wasn't mythic John Wayne. And, Stagecoach
right.
was 39.
Yeah, you're right.
So, MacMurray, for a guy who always, another interesting thing about it is for a guy who always seemed to play nice guys, his best performances were his darker characters. Was Walter Neff in Double Indemnity, probably his most famous role certainly, or Kiefer in the K Mutiny. So this guy definitely had dark sides to him that really weren't plumbed. And then of course he did all those Disney movies, and he became a My Three Sons. And I do want to tell a funny story about Fred MacMurray that Barry Livingston told me. And I interviewed Barry Livingston when I was hosting the Lucy Show DVDs. I would interview people who were involved in the series, and Barry Livingston played Theodore J. Mooney's son on a couple episodes of the Lucy Show in the second season. So he was one of Theodore J. Mooney's three sons, which is kind of ironic. So anyway, so I interviewed people, Lucy Arnaz, Carol Cook, and one of the people I interviewed was Barry Livingston, and he told me this story about Fred MacMurray off camera. So it's not in the interview, unfortunately, but I'm going to tell it to you now for the first time, or maybe the second time. So anyway, Fred MacMurray, by the time they were going to do My Three Sons, Fred MacMurray did not want to do it. He did not want to do a sitcom. He was doing all these Disney movies. He was doing fine. He had enough money. He didn't care. But they really wanted him to do it. For some reason, they had to have him do it. So he finally agreed to do it. But his stipulation was that all of his scenes had to be filmed first. So any scene that involved Fred MacMurray's character, Steve Douglas, that took place in the upstairs hallway was filmed one after the other, after the other, the after. He would just change his sweater. And then any scene that took place in the bedroom had to be filmed one after the other. Can you imagine what this does to a production? So all of your scripts for the year, all of your guest stars have to be set before you even begin filming. So they would film all of the scenes, and Barry Livingston told me this. So they would film all of the scenes at the top of the season, and then after about 6 weeks, Fred MacMurray would be done, and he'd be gone. He'd be off filming another Disney movie. They couldn't get a hold of him. So that left the rest of his co-stars for the rest of the season to film their portion of their scenes with him to a coat rack.
Which has about just as much personality.
I was going to say, and if you know Fred MacMurray, it ain't that much different. I just love that. How is that for a generous actor? You know what? You got to do your scenes now. Oh, but just pretend the coat wrecks Fred MacMurray.
Okay. That doesn't even require acting.
No, it doesn't. But anyway, yeah, I don't think Fred MacMurray, as far as gifted actors go, is that challenging. I can see that. Well, the movie did good, but you didn't like it. So
no, I didn't like it. The other thing was, this is where Kate really let me down. As I said, I was really uncomfortable in the dance scene. I was really uncomfortable through the whole thing. Like when she's on when she's trying to get him to leave. Maurice and I didn't talk through the whole thing, other than him grumbled a couple of times. I just tried to ignore him because I don't want to get my opinion, changed, even though we disagree on movies all the time.
Yeah.
But she's looking at him and she has that weird smile and she kept cocking her head. And like you said, she never blinked. And I looked at Maurice and I said, she acts like an old creepy witch in a horror film. And he looks at me and goes, exactly.
Oh, God. Wow. Well, there's a ringing endorsement.
We have disagreed before, but man, this one we really disagree.
Well, good. I'm glad. We said we needed more disagreements. We needed to find things. And I don't think it's a matter of disagreeing. I think it's just a matter of finding things that appeal to you in a movie that don't appeal to me and vice versa.
It's a difference of opinion.
I find her so empathetic, as I said. She just tears my heart out in this. And it's because Stevens crafted these scenes, which were so uncomfortable. You know, as I said, they became very good friends after this. And after the Philadelphia story was a very crucial time in her career because the Philadelphia story was a hit. So she was on her way back. But the next one was really the important one because that would solidify her comeback. And that was Woman of the Year. And when she knew that she wanted to do Woman of the Year, and she knew how important it was to her, she didn't turn to George Cukor, her great friend. She turned to George Stevens because she trusted him that much. So I kind of love that about George Stevens. And by the way, there's a scene in Woman of the Year at the end, which is also very controversial, which is mostly in silence too. So you can see this is the George Stevens hand. So I love the fact that this movie set George Stevens on his way, and he became one of the great directors of the era. And I really love Hepburn in this. So listener, you're either going to be cranky ass like Brad and say she looks like a witch, or you can just have great sympathy and love for this poor girl who's just trying to better her life, named Alice Adams.
And listen, I really tried.
Well, I just snorted. Well, I guess then that's Alice Adams for us for today. Unless there's something else you want to try.
I'm just going to say I am going to leave my little slip up where I said that actors make brilliant waiters, even though
it's a great line.
I don't know how many times Tony will make me re-record some of his slip-ups.
Oh, please. Never. This is all live conversation. All right, Brad. Well, you know, I hate to say it. Well, maybe not today. But let's not say goodbye. Let's just say au revoir.
No, let's definitely say goodbye.
Yeah, goodbye.
That's all, folks.